Hello, welcome to Faster FinTech. I'm delighted you're all here tonight. Thank you for coming. Faster FinTech, today's discussion is a discussion jointly sponsored by the School of Engineering and the Graduate School of Business. Before we get started, I would love to remind you all to please turn off your cell phones. And throughout the evening, you will see two people walking up and down the aisles. They are collecting questions for the Q&A portion, so please signal to them when you see them coming through. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's program. And the Intersection programs consists of a series of conversations in which faculty from different Stanford schools explore areas of common research interest from their different disciplines and perspectives. To talk about the future of financial technology, we have brought together three experts in their fields. Balaji Prabhakar is VMware Founder's Professor of Computer Science and faculty member in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. His research interests are in computer networks, notably in data center networks and cloud computing platforms. He has also worked on societal networks vital for society's functioning, such as transportation, electricity, and recycling systems. Darrell Duffie is the Dean Witter Distinguished Professor of Finance at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He is also a Senior Fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Institute and an alum from Stanford Engineering with a PhD in Engineering Economic Systems. Darrell's research focuses on the design and regulation of capital markets. And our moderator for this evening is John Markoff, a research affiliate at Stanford Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences. He reported on science and technology for the New York Times for over 18 years and was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize 5 times and, with his team, was awarded the Pulitzer in explanatory reporting. He is currently researching a biography of Stewart Brand, the creator of Whole Earth Catalog. Please join me tonight in welcoming them.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, we're good. Great. And Stewart Brand was a Stanford student, so there is a connection. So it's been a half century since the advent of packet switch networks. It's been 48 years since the microprocessor was invented. And so we're partway through this interesting transition from a commerce system which is rooted in paper and metal to one that's rooted in bits and glass. And the question I hope we can pursue tonight is whether this is a one-time transition, like indoor plumbing. Are we sort of at the end of this transition? Or is it something else? Are we at the beginning of something that's going to remarkably transform the world over the next couple of decades? And to get us going, I wanted to ask Darrell if you could start by maybe painting a picture, maybe not a decade in the future, but there's all these forces based on technologies that are emerging largely from this part of the world that are changing the commerce system. What might it look like in the relatively near future?
We already have actually a pretty good idea just looking into China. They're getting a head start on the United States. They have a mobile payment system that's roughly a factor of 100 more transactions than in the US, and 500 million users swishing money around on their mobile phones to make payments using QR codes. There are even infamous videos of beggars in the street with, rather than a hat, they actually have their QR code ready to collect payments by WeChat Pay or Alipay. Just so that I can kind of gauge the level of familiarity, how many people here tonight have ever used or have on their iPhones Venmo or WeChat Pay or Alipay? Wow. Okay. So that's a sign that it's not 10 years off. It's happening right away. Yeah. And the vision is what I call faster payments. When you pay today, most of the time it's going against your credit card. It might be going against your bank account, but the person that's getting paid is actually not getting paid until tomorrow or perhaps the day after. And a lot can happen in a day or two. The money gets held up. It goes through deposit accounts in the banks where it holds very little interest. It gets very little interest. And vendors are getting delayed on their payments. Meanwhile, in the big banks on Wall Street, they need to make their payments much faster just because there's so much money involved. And they are also developing new payment methods. And one of the visions is that rather than going through the bank payment system where all of these devices are connected to now, all the people in the audience are getting paid one way or the other through the banks, that may happen through other methods like cryptocurrencies. And I know, how many of you have ever actually purchased a cryptocurrency? Wow, okay, so we have a pretty sophisticated audience. Okay, so first, let me disabuse you of the idea that this could ever be done with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is just not suitable for making fast payments. It's very slow, and its price is very volatile, so you couldn't count on the value that you wanted to send getting to somebody in a proper way. But there are new methods called stablecoins, which are cryptocurrencies which, if done properly, will always be worth $1 per coin. And they'll be able to be transmitted very rapidly. And there are lots of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are developing these right now, and they're going to be ready to deploy anytime.
There's still, I think, a fair amount of skepticism about some of these new kinds of cryptocurrencies. Tether, in particular, is one that seems to be in the gun sights of skeptics. Are the currencies that you believe will solve the problems of the first generation of cryptocurrencies, do they already exist, or do you think they are to come?
They're just nascent. So JP Morgan, the bank, has just come up with an imaginatively named JP Morgan coin, which is fully backed dollar for dollar with deposits at JP Morgan. And that will work.
Okay, so take me through this. Are we going to see a proliferation of payment systems, and how will I as a consumer make sense out of this, or will there quickly be a monopolization of?
It's kind of like the subway system or the telephone system. There's only a certain number of these that can actually survive, that because of the massive economies of scale and scope. It wouldn't work if I wanted to pay you with JP Morgan coins and you wanted to pay me with another cryptocurrency like Tether. So we're going to end up most likely having a small number of these that are widely used, if the authorities allow that. And that's another issue entirely.
There's this thing called fiat currency. How will they?
Okay, so let me put my thinking on as a potential regulator. So if I were at the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, I would be fine with this as long as it didn't get too big. And then I would start to worry that people are using this other currency than the one that the Fed, controls, then I won't be able to do my job of controlling inflation and promoting economic growth. And if some operational failure were to occur, that could bring down the financial system. So I think the central banks of the world will allow these to sit on the fringe, maybe be used for consumer payments or for specialty purpose, big bank settlement of trades, but they won't be the general payment currency of the economy.
And then what does this do, this kind of the emergent payment system world that you're talking about, do to our existing banking system? Do we need banks in this kind of an environment? Are they at some risk?
I just gave a talk at the New York Fed a couple months ago, and it was titled "Disruption is Coming." And I was speaking about the impact on the banks. Some of the banks are going to try to get ahead of the curve, but the ones that don't, they're going to see those massive amounts of deposits sitting in their accounts, and for which they're paying almost no interest. Those are just going to go way down, and they're going to lose out in the technology wars. JP Morgan alone is spending $16 billion a year on tech, of which a lot is devoted to these kinds of initiatives. And there are other banks that are doing the same, but a lot of other banks are going to get left behind. Any bank that's not big enough or not nimble enough is going to lose out in this disruption.
So there have been reports in the last couple weeks that Facebook again is working on its own currency. I think they're called Suckbucks by some. I mean,
the Amazon, Facebook, Google, these are the analogs of what's happening in China. Those of you in the audience that have Alipay and WeChat Pay, you're holding the analogs of what in the US would be Amazon Pay, or the new Facebook coin, or a possible Google coin. And it doesn't have to be a cryptocurrency. It could be a fast payment system. But those tech firms could eat the banks for lunch if they really got going on this, because they have all of the network in place. They don't have to develop a network.
Yeah. And so in that model also, what happens to things like ATMs?
Okay, so how many in the audience actually use paper money today? Raise your hands. Wow, a lot of paper money users too. Well, I haven't carried paper money in a long time. But I think ATMs are going to be few and far between pretty soon.
Okay. And then so I mean, there's been this model in this transition. ATMs were supposed to kill bank tellers. But in fact, because of the falling cost of computation and the explosion of computer networks, banks put branches on every street corner, and they began to use tellers as salespeople. In the new world you're talking about, does this get reset one more time?
Absolutely. It's going to be a lot of. Actually, there was a story in your former newspaper just last week, I believe, about small community banks in America not having any success, and the large banks reducing the number of branches dramatically, to the point at which you may have to go searching for an ATM machine in 10 years like you now have to search for a telephone booth.
Yeah.
And the number of employees in banks that are actually doing customer service is also going to go way down, I think.
So I want to get to speed quickly, but before we get to speed, what about the people who can't participate? What about the people who don't have bank accounts, who are being pushed through the cracks? In this kind of a world, are they pushed farther off the edge?
Yeah, this is a serious concern. China has just passed a law requiring that vendors take paper money because they're so concerned about the unbanked people, particularly in the countryside, that don't have mobile phones and bank accounts. Now, China actually has pretty good penetration, but let's take a country like Vietnam. Only 30% of people in Vietnam actually have a bank account, which is kind of a prerequisite for using any of these things. So if you don't have paper money, and vendors won't take paper money, that could be a serious problem. Sweden has remarkably little use of paper money. I was there just a couple months ago. I couldn't actually use my paper money at my hotel. And they are worried, and they're probably going to introduce some form of electronic money that will be a substitute.
But that's not the case. Doesn't the United States have kind of a cash economy, an underground economy that trades in cash and thriving? And the people who sort of they'll work on the books and then they'll work off the books for cash. That's called the underground economy.
Yeah, if you think about the amount of paper currency that's circulating right now, it's about $1.5 trillion. Probably only half of that is used legally.
The rest is in $100 bills.
The rest is, smuggling money or underground untaxed economy.
Yeah.
India recently tried to remove cash from its system, or a large portion of the cash from its system, in order to try to reduce the amount of this kind of black economy use of paper cash.
So if you had to predict a decade from now in the U.S., less cash, no cash?
The U.S. will be one of the last to go. It's a very conservative country relative to some of the other countries that we've just been speaking about. Okay. So I think cash will be here for a long time. I don't know how long, but we still have the $1 paper bill, which is kind of a sign that Americans don't like giving up their paper money.
So to make this work, you need these very powerful computer platforms, backends, markets that allow these transactions to happen. Balaji, how did you come to get interested in the problem of time and computing?
Well, actually, if you look at how computing, let's say in the 60s, bifurcated from centralized sort of things that were single machine or a set of machines that was a high-speed interconnect to look like a single monolithic system, and they went into this whole supercomputing, high-performance system sort of trajectory. And the other thing that began was distributed computing. Lots of cheaper, less powerful machines connected through an interconnect that was not necessarily super high performance, and that evolved into now sort of essentially the cloud computing sort of paradigm. At the same time, on the networking side, communications, we had circuit switching and packet switching, and what circuit switching guaranteed was 100% real time. Nothing is buffered anywhere, and so it just everything is a circuit is dedicated. for a connection. And packet switching changed all that and introduced jitters. What I send to you may not get to you the same speed every time I send it. It could take more or less time depending on who else was there. Right? And so that jitter, network, which we call best effort service, so as not to promise anything at all, right? Went and became all this global internet, Ethernet, all this data center stuff. And I think we've given up. We had essentially, both conceptually and in fact, given up on time and real time. In the sense that if you have to take one of these distributed systems and make them look like a single monolithic system, which they do, like databases guarantee consistencies of various kind, they will do this by exchanging messages. So we'll stop doing some work for a while, and then the nodes of this database will agree that this is the order in which transactions shall appear, commit to that, and then proceed.
This is like a trade, like a financial trade would be a good example.
That's a good example. For example, foreign exchange trading, many people are considering putting it on blockchains, especially the settlement and clearance side of it. And it's important to have things on a single common timeline if possible, or a non-controvertible, nobody disagrees with it. Everybody's commonly agreed to this, succession of events. And that was then, this is because we as a community gave up on, we started building systems with a clockless assumption. And that has been the ethos of distributed systems. And we've learned how to cope with this. But now imagine that we actually can revisit this question of can clocks be synchronized across a large network where there are random delays, possibly, between any two pair of nodes. That's the problem that more recently, about a year and a half or two ago, we started working on.
And you solved, right,
Yeah.
for all practical purposes?
More or less, at scale.
Good enough that a market like NASDAQ could deploy it commercially?
Yes.
And would you talk about why they chose to deploy it? What was it simply about front running? This issue of being able to place that?
Yeah. So there are two things here. Front running is, I'll come to that separately. Front running is sort of information arbitrage of I know something ahead of somebody else. But keeping that aside for a second, just consider a single financial exchange on its own. There are market participants. They're all sitting, accessing certain gateways where the financial exchange officially begins. So gateway 1, gateway 2, gateway 3, like that. And then these transactions or the bids that market participants place across these gateways, maybe different gateways for different market participants, and make their way through to this matching engine, where if you're looking for something to sell and I'm looking for something to buy, we meet over there, and the matching engine, performs the trade, so long as the prices are how we would like. Okay, and in this world between gateway to matching engine, there's this need for what's called fairness. Fairness is that the order in which transactions cross the gateway, no matter what gateway they arrive at, that is exactly the order in which they should be executed. So if you saw a price that's favorable for your strategy or trading, and you chose to transact then, and you cross the gateway ahead of me, then you should be transacted. Your transaction should go through first. Unfortunately, in the world where these networks have jitters, this is not easy to guarantee. Okay, and so occasionally it does happen. And these networks are very carefully engineered. They measure the delays, and sometimes they lengthen the wires. If one path is shorter than the other, they will make it longer. Okay, and so it's very carefully manicured networks what these financial exchanges look like. And in fact, we were taking a tour of one of the exchanges, and the flooring is transparent. And the goal is to show the market participants, look, all the wires are the same length. Okay, so we wouldn't have known until they told us that this is why the tiles are transparent. Okay,
and in their world right now, what kind of precision do they need? I mean,
so they're at the nanosecond level, pretty much.
So that's 12 inches. That's how far light goes in.
No, it's 5 nanoseconds per meter on fiber. Okay,
yeah.
And it's a pretty. So if you have, because transactions are coming thick and fast,
yeah.
The time taken from going from tick to trade is down into a few tens of nanoseconds now.
And you're able to give them the precision just in software now. That was sort of the breakthrough.
That's right.
And it's called Huygens. Is that
That's
is that
right.
correct?
That's the algorithm.
You did this with Google.
Google was a collaborator. We worked the summer internship with a student whose thesis work. This is Ilong Gang, and I see Shiyu Li, who's another collaborator on that work. And Xian are the three students and Google researchers.
In the past, you've actually created companies to create technologies and then sold them. Why did you choose not to go that direction this time?
We are.
Oh.
but well, let me say why. Well, first of all, this is Stanford. No, the thing is that sometimes this software has to be produced for production readiness, and it's not easy to take an advanced academic prototype, which may be good for a proof of concept or a pilot, and that somebody can install and have it run in production environments where the network interface cards are variously different, or operating conditions are changing, and so that's one of the things. But I think time itself is a foundational piece. This is sort of, now you have the opportunity to revisit the choices made a few decades ago about why go this way versus that, and then say, well, if time is solved, what can we do?
But I got this sense, you're now slicing time so thinly. It reminded me, Zenos' paradox of the turtle bumping his nose against the wall. You're kind of pushing up against fundamental limits?
There's still pico. Okay. We're nano, there's, femto. That people actually have been talking about such things. The thing is that I've heard certain physicists say that we're at the relativistic timescales. This is speed of light, speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second. So we're in that relativistic terms. But there are phenomena that are at even lower time scales. But for practical purposes, today's technology, I think we're where we should be.
Yeah. And was there a significant? Michael Lewis wrote a book in 2014, which was very popular and very controversial, apparently. Was there a real front-running problem that these people had to solve?
Well, there is a front-running problem. There is, and the one way you can think of it is that so it is the case that if you're trading with other people's money, you're required as a broker acting on behalf of somebody else to look for the national best bid or offer, NBBO. Okay, that requires this person to go check with multiple exchanges as to what is the best price. But the very act of checking for 100 shares of some company's stocks, you're close to one exchange, and then the other exchange that you're checking out is distant from you. Now, in both these places, you're getting to them on wires. So it's possible for someone else to hear your bid here and then take an air link, or like a microwave link over there, and get there ahead of you and wait for you. That's the front-running problem. And they know exactly what you're looking for because they already heard you say so here, right? One way of solving this problem is to put, speed bumps. Speed bumps are, you slow down the speed of trading. You don't have to do it as frequently as people are doing it. That's one way. The other way also is to just for the trader to, not place orders until a certain time in the future, place them simultaneously. And that if the clocks are synchronized, you could do this.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, so now you've controlled time. Google talks about this notion of a planetary scale computer, these platforms that are smeared out. Are there other obvious financial applications? Capacity would be one, obviously, but are there other things you can do when you can precisely control time the way you can now?
Oh yeah, no, so a lot of the distributed systems that people have built, databases. Google has this global database called Spanner, which guarantees what's called external consistency. As seen by an external observer, events are in a sort of linear order as it happened according to an external observer. That is done through a clock service that they have called TrueTime. Similarly, in our group, we've done other work using accurate clocks. Let's go revisit whether distributed ledgers of the blockchain type could be sped up. Whether consensus protocols like famous ones called Paxos and Raft, could they be made to be higher throughput and lower latency now that you have accurate clocks? And the idea here mostly is that if you can agree on time, then it becomes easier to agree on other things. And that's how time acquires a certain primacy in these ventures.
Darrell, you brought up the specter of China in a really quite striking way, and we just sort of glossed over it. But you basically said China's ahead of us in the deployment of this financial technology. And if you've been to China recently, and particularly in urban China, I don't know how spread out it is across the country, it's really quite striking. WeChat as a social and economic tool is so far ahead of the way we as Americans are using Facebook, for example. I guess I want you to assess where China is as a competitor, either financial or technological. I mean, do you take that where you think it'll go?
Well, you're hitting on one of the questions of the last few months, because, as you know, the U.S. administration has been engaged with China over issues of this sort: technology transfer and the use of sensitive technology. In the finance area, I don't think the technology transfer issues are so critical. So there was a recent attempt by a Chinese firm to acquire a stock exchange in Chicago, which the United States turned down. And each of those two countries have an authority whose purpose is to accept or deny a transaction that would involve technology transfer. And that's how it's currently being controlled. But right now, because of these trade negotiations between China and the United States, this is all in play. How much will American firms be permitted to do in China without transferring technology? How much trade involving technology will go in either direction? That's all being worked out. So it's a question that's extremely pertinent right now.
I have to tell you, as a reporter, if you go to Beijing and you're in the third ring, you feel like you're in Silicon Valley, except that the air quality is much worse, and they don't seem to worry about this thing called democracy. Culturally, it's so similar, it's eerie.
I teach a course on China's financial system for our graduate students here at Stanford, and one of our speakers is a venture capitalist who works in both the United States and China. This is Richard Lim, and he described Beijing as second only to Silicon Valley in terms of the vibrancy of the tech entrepreneurship scene, and they're moving very rapidly there. Yeah. And the government is heavily involved. Their venture funds, a significant amount of that is directly coming from the government.
A general question about these next generation financial technologies. Do you think, as a rule, they are either stabilizing or destabilizing in the sense of the kinds of problems that our financial markets face on occasion? Can you make any generalizations? Do they give us guardrails, or do they strip away the guardrails?
I think so. From my view, I'm going to take a view of a technologist, used to sort of seeing software upgrades go from once in 2 years to once in a year, and now it's all happening continuously, right? And certainly hardware and firmware updates are all reasonably frequent. Financial, trading platforms or financial institutions, for regulatory reasons or even just having, because so many participants and they all need to get ready to move to some new thing, have moved slowly in the past. But increasingly, I think this disruption is coming is correct. One of the advantages of freeing these networks of the worry of accurate clocks is that you can move them into the cloud, for example. That's one of the big motivations and goals, because now you don't have to be worrying about a small number of gateways. And the cost of participating in these markets goes down dramatically, because it costs a fair amount of money, a few tens of millions of dollars, to be present at all the venues where these exchanges are, and get yourself one of these cages so your machines can sit there and participate. And I think that disruption will happen. And now you're at the pace of cloud. I mean, if cloud providers make available AI/ML tools, which they have, then you can revise your trading strategies more frequently because the market data is available right there. And so this is sort of what's exciting in a way. that the whole ecosystem could, change fairly quickly. I think in that sense, I can see it. Disruption is coming.
I want to add to that. I think Balaji is on exactly the right note, which is that the demand for speed and volume is growing by leaps and bounds, and the technology just needs to stay ahead of that. All of the cases not all, but many of the cases of financial crashes that we've had are cases in which the technology was not able to keep up with the demand for speed. Today, every day, there are $17 trillion of transactions on the world's large payment systems. And were it not for the very stable, fast technologies enabling that, global commerce would just have to slow down. And that would not, people would not have as many jobs, they would have as much to eat. The whole economy rests on developing a financial system that's capable of staying ahead of that demand.
It's another kind of green revolution, I guess.
Yeah, good one.
So I don't want to leave China. We talked before about this social credit score that the government of China has instituted. And I was thinking about it because I use this service called Mint, which is a free service, and it shows me my credit score every time I go there. And I thought, well, there's only one word missing. And that's a cultural difference. But the credit score may already be being used like a kind of quasi-social credit score in America. Are you worried about, what will be the impact of that kind of technology?
Just to make sure we're all on the same plane here, John's talking about a development of a system in China that basically monitors individual behavior and keeps track of who's been doing good things and who's not been doing good things.
According to the government.
According to the government. It's a very centralized system. It's very controversial. It's very effective if you're in charge, if you want to be in charge. And then it has other shortfalls. I don't think it would go over very easily in the United States. On the other hand, a friend of mine visited my office 2 days ago. This is a banker who just bought a database for only $250,000 that allows him to monitor everyone in the room, everybody in the United States through their GPS. So they can see, if you've signed up for any kinds of services on your iPhone, chances are you checked a box without knowing it that allows that service to monitor your location and certain types of transactions that you're doing. So when you walk into Walgreens, or you go into the perhaps to get a driver's license, or go to the bank, many of those kinds of things are being monitored. And this bank analyst is going to use this database he's not going to use it the way that a social credit score would be used, but another person could keep very close tabs on you. And he said when he bought this database and realized that he can monitor individuals right down to where their home location is, so he decided to turn off all of his, uncheck all the checks on his.
This is anonymized data that's not anonymized.
It's not really, because it's anonymous. However, it is able to monitor your location, including the residence of your home. Basically where you are. So they can basically get, by merging with other databases, can find out exactly who you are, what you're doing at most times of day.
Wow. So in Europe, there's this thing called the GDPR. Would that prohibit this kind of?
Yes, you can request that you get unchecked from all of this, and you could do that. He did it himself. My friend did it himself by basically going back through all of his iPhone connections and turning them all off. But that probably would keep that in check to some extent. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this particular system.
There's also a school of thought that blockchains, which are supposed to be immutable by design, would also run afoul with the GDPR. Have you looked at the problems that they would face?
No. Balaji, any ideas on that?
No, you're right. It's immutable, but it's still anonymous.
Unchangeable, yeah.
But anonymous, nevertheless. Meaning you could potentially preserve some aspects of anonymity, because that's the other aspect of blockchains that is interesting and useful, right? So, fiat, like hard currency, you can destroy it, but as long as the router is immutable. But it's anonymous. The holder of it can change, and it doesn't stick to you in any way. Yeah. And I think that feature exists with blockchain. So it's a question of how sticky something can be made to be as far as your personal information is concerned. But can I just cover one thing? That I think the disruption that when I hear Darrell talk about payments and currency systems, the idea that a mobile phone in a person's hand or people's hands and a service offer from the cloud. This is sort of a big, for me as a networks and a cloud type person, this is a big deal. That's changed everything. Like if you look at us hailing for taxis on the road and now you hail on your phone, that's a phone in my hand and some service in the cloud. Retail, Amazon's done that to retail. We used to go to the department stores to buy, but department stores are becoming like banks. No need for them in physical locations are not relevant anymore. Physical stores are not relevant necessarily. And so I think this, something that is a service offered to you for which you don't need to have cash payments directly, but mobile form of payments are adequate, but then you get a real service back, okay? And I think that disruption as applied to the financial services industry itself is essentially what's getting underway now.
Well, it raises an interesting question that might be very theoretical, but I'd like to ask your reactions. There is this mysterious absence of inflation in the American economy right now. And there is a particular school of thought that it's because of Silicon Valley technologies that there is no inflation. I was wondering if you guys either have a viewpoint about why is there no inflation?
Well, actually, there was a study just completed about a month ago that said that's not the hidden reason. It's not like that's not the black matter in the economy that's keeping inflation down. In fact, the added technology is not contributing to GDP as much as you might think. A lot of it is being used for personal leisure activities like playing games on your iPhone. But there is, it is an interesting question why inflation is so stable despite all of the roller coaster ride that the economy is taking. And it's been a big debate, and it's a mystery among central bankers. Some people ascribe it to a broken theory known as the Phillips curve, which is supposed to show a relationship between unemployment and inflation that has stopped working, and people are completely mystified about why it's not working anymore.
I have one small claim to fame in the fintech world, and that is that my uncle invented the ETF, which is a very small claim.
Wow.
But Uncle Nate invented the spider at American Stock Exchange some years ago. But ETFs have come to be a very significant part of the economy. There is also an argument that hidden in the ETF world is the kind of leverage that got us in trouble in 2008. And I was wondering, I know this is all speculative, but I was wondering if that's a concern.
I was, for 3 years, I was on the board of directors of iShares, which is the largest ETF complex. And we were getting these queries about, is it really true that there's an explosive problem here where people all try to cash in their ETFs at the same time, that the underlying assets will have to be sold and the economy will head into a tailspin. Of course, you might second guess my opinion since I was at iShares, but it's simply not the problem that people suggest. The ETFs don't add to the problem, they in fact mitigate the problem, because in order to cash in an ETF, unlike a normal mutual fund, nobody has to sell the underlying stocks or bonds. You can just sell the ETF. It would be like taking your mutual fund and selling it directly rather than forcing someone to sell all the assets in it. So it's not really the problem that it's made out to be. Now that's not to say that there won't be hiccups in the system as if there's a bad run of events and people decide they all want to sell their ETFs. Yeah, the prices will go down a lot. And then other investors may step in and buy them, but it's not going to cause a financial crisis.
I also wanted to ask you guys about the financial system and the future of the workforce, because there is a kind of a narrative about 2008 and the Great Recession that one of the consequences is these large corporations contracted, and then when they came back, largely through business process reengineering, they came back and they grew without jobs. And so there was a layer of semi-skilled white-collar labor that went away. Millions of jobs that were the real casualties of that recession. And we're in the same way as that we have this mystery around inflation, we have a mystery about employment. We have the lowest, despite all of the forecasts in Silicon Valley that the robots are going to get us, there are more people working in this country than ever in history right now. And there are lots of caveats, but still we have pretty low, we have reasonably low unemployment. I was wondering if you guys, now if we could look forward and see this wave of financial technology that's sort of spreading out through the economy. Do you have a view one way or the other about its impact?
Again, I think it's a reallocation of, if you look at what happened in transportation, Detroit, as it was losing jobs and layoffs were taking place, suddenly Uber and Lyft are picking up, large, workforce. So it's sort of a different kind of job in the same industry. A redefinition of the industry was underway. I think that, if you look at, now that I'm speaking to a number of Wall Street type firms, I keep hearing them say things that I've been hearing in the Valley, like we are a tech company that happens to be trading, or that happens to be, everybody's at Amazon's a tech company that happens to be in retail. So this is a mantra that's now being repeated on Wall Street. We're a tech company that happens to be a bank, investment bank, etc. But what that means also is that the amount of tech uptake into these companies, not just consumers of technology, which they've been forever, but creators of technology, some new tools that could be more ubiquitously and widely used. That's what they're heading towards. If they acquire the bench strength to do that some of these tech companies here have, I think that's going to be very interesting redefinition.
Thoughts on employment?
I'm quite an optimist on this. I think if you just look at the progress of human civilization, the extent to which we've hit the ceiling in terms of our ability to find new and exciting and productive things to do, we're not even close to that. And so as new technologies develop, they'll be leapfrogged by other technologies. Many people in the audience, especially the younger ones, will be coming into the workforce to either develop or exploit these technologies. There's no particular reason, at least not in economics, to believe that this is at some point we're all going to be out of work because we've gotten so productive that there's nothing else left for us to do ourselves. I don't think that's coming.
Well, along those lines, do either of you have thoughts about the future of financial advice? I was looking today at these startups like Betterment and Wealthfront, and you look at assets under management. They got several $1 billion, and then I went over and checked Vanguard and Schwab, and they have many trillions of dollars. And so, what's the future of the automated financial advisor? Is that something that will be as disruptive as?
It's getting quite popular, and it's a very inexpensive way to get financial advice. And I think it can be used for example, if you want to help the people in your company to manage their retirement savings through your pension plan. Personally, I don't think it's good value for money to have each one of them go off to an independent human financial advisor and get individual financial advice that, much of which will not be that effective. I think having a more, machine learning or a more algorithmic approach to this that can be cheap is the way to go.
Can you imagine a world in which Siri and Alexa and what have you will be the pathways and conduits for that kind of conversation you'll have with your financial advisor?
Could be, but I think it literally could be done on your iPhone, on your smartphone.
I'm going to be more positive because he's from the business school, I'm from School of Engineering. So yes, I think algorithms are going to start advising. They'll probably do a good job. They'll probably pass the Turing test before. An algorithm is going to be a financial advisor before. So in that sense, I think it's coming and it'll be faster.
Yeah. Let me ask you about inequality. In the last 2 decades, there's been a dramatic increase in inequality in the United States. Do you think technology in Silicon Valley is to blame at all? Why, why are we seeing this tremendous spread of wealth and poverty in America?
I don't know if it's to blame, but it's happening. Both are happening, and I think they're related. I think it's too much to say one is causing the other. I don't know if Silicon Valley's output is big enough, but I think manufacturing is where a lot of it is occurring. I think one thing I'm noticing is the amount of things that people don't mind reusing is going up, and it's a very interesting generational thing that I see a lot of. Like, ownership of things is not as important, it seems, for younger people, which could, see a sort of tapering off of manufacturing.
The car industry worries.
Car industry, as an example.
Yeah.
But others too. I mean, people are, staying in other people's homes for a lot longer than they used to, right? And people wanted to own homes soon, as quickly as possible, but that's not the case anymore, not necessarily. Right? And that's also happening, and that's not a statement about inequality, but that represents a certain kind of demand going down.
I mean, it's a question of. I mean, you spoke earlier, John, about a portion of the middle class that the phrase that economists use is the hollowing out of the middle class, and I think you have seen a lot of that happening in the last 50 years in the United States with the extremes of income inequality and wealth inequality in this country. And it to a certain extent, it doesn't need to be. There could be a much more progressive tax system that redistributes some of the income and wealth, without necessarily killing off Silicon Valley and all of the other sources of wealth creation. You can create a lot of wealth, and then distribute the wealth, I think, more evenly. It doesn't have to be in the form necessarily of direct payments. It can be through healthcare. Minimum wages, housing. There's a lot of different views about whether that's an effective approach or not. And we're seeing a much fiercer debate now in the political spectrum about redistribution, as you've probably noticed, with some of the new Democratic Congress people advocating much higher tax rates. Personally, I think the income inequality in the United States is out of whack, and it should be fixed.
So I guess we're going to have questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask you one other area. There's an interesting current debate in Silicon Valley that plays on business strategy, and I guess it lives on top of the platforms that we've created here in Silicon Valley. And that was started by Reid Hoffman, who was advocating this business strategy, which he calls blitzscaling, which is, I think, embodied by Uber and Lyft, as you raise a tremendous amount of capital and then you dominate a market, you get a monopoly as soon as possible as a business strategy. And it's probably not new in Silicon Valley. I think Larry Ellison said, he said it's not enough to win, everybody else must fail, which is kind of an example of blitzscaling, I would imagine. But recently, Tim O'Reilly, who runs a publishing company and he's an investor, has sort of criticized that as a strategy because it might not be the best thing for society. Amazon, for example, grew without taking a lot of capital. They borrowed money, but they didn't take investment capital. That was a different approach. O'Reilly's company grew organically over a long period of time. And it might be argued that having a non-monopolistic situation in a particular market might be good for an economy. If you had many competitors, it might benefit consumers. Although I guess Google is a counterexample, perhaps. Have you looked at that argument, and do either of you have thoughts on the Silicon Valley strategy du jour?
We could come back full circle to where I started, which is with WeChat and Ant or Alibaba in China. That's a duopoly, and blitzscaling is a fantastic word for describing the competition between those two firms to get to scale as fast as possible because of the enormous economies of scale and scope. If you just think about why does anyone want to join WeChat? That's because everybody else has joined WeChat. And the faster you can get to scale, the greater your chance of dominating the market. an Uber versus Lyft is a similar example. These are all social, economic enterprises that thrive on scale and network economies. And you should expect it in the payment system, you should expect it in telecommunications, social networks of all types. We should expect monopolies or duopolies to dominate ever more as the economy becomes more integrated through faster technology like fintech.
Well, I actually think that it was one of the things I worked on for about 8 or 9 years, and was transportation. And there are many routes in a bus system or on a metro system that are not running at full capacity and are in fact not profitable. But there's a requirement of a public service like public transport that it takes some routes with loss while continuing because there's still some people that need to be serviced on those routes. It's just simply the way a city is. You happen to have a house over there, there's not much traffic going over there, and then, but you need to get home and get to work. And so your route is running at a loss, but the system as a whole will subsidize that route. This is true for airline industry, it's true for many things. I worry that, if systems become a monopoly, and not even just a duopoly or anything, that the neglect that some areas may suffer from are really going to be difficult to explain or for the city to bear. This is already happening. Sometimes when you're when you're traveling abroad, or when I've been in India, and you hail somebody and they show up, and if it's not an Uber or somebody you ordered on your phone, who already knew where you were going, often they listen to where you want to go, and then they don't, so I'm not going there. And you lose like some 20 of these vehicles that are just passing you by after, they're not going where you want to go. And so this is an example of something that's very tough for public systems. And I think that's not necessarily desirable. And I think when people burn money, what they do is, this is the thing this is the sort of loss they can't take on. Yeah. Right? The system can't take it on.
So there's some good questions here. Let's let the audience participate. This is for Darrell, for the first one. How do you think the digital economy is going to hurt the jobs dependent on the cash economy?
Okay, so it used to be that marijuana was a cash economy. That's probably not the case anymore.
It still is. They don't let them bank yet.
By regulation.
Yeah, that's... I'm trying to think about what... this definitely, it makes sense. As cash becomes more and more scarce, it's going to be hard to run your business on cash, and people won't with cash won't be able to use it. But I'm trying to think about what significant parts of our economy that are legal can't be done without cash.
A lot of them have been dragged into the gig economy, haven't they?
Yeah, I still pay cash for my haircuts. $17. But I suppose if there were no cash, they would have to take a credit card. I don't know. That's a good question, but I can't think of any parts of our economy that depend so heavily on cash that we can't do without it.
Yeah. Here's a question for Balaji. First one, blockchain and related systems require intense electricity, server equipment, and land use. Who should pay for this?
Yeah, that's the way it is now. But I think it's one of those first generation, second generation sort of thing. What I'm sure we'll read, I don't know, 5 years from now is the same thing we read about the Princeton ENIAC machine taking a big room and being some, less than some kiloops. And some, I'm not even sure with regards to kiloops, whatever the number was, right? So the amount of memory it had, it was so small. I think it's going to be like that. I think the inefficiency, technological inefficiency, people will find a way to overcome and solve. As to whether the puzzle solving is required, which is why all this is happening, that's not clear. Meaning, there are other ways one can conceive of potentially doing things, and people will conceive of them.
Yeah. The second one is someone who basically didn't take your message on stability, I think, to heart. We have seen U.S. stock market crashes because of robot computing. If we speed up robot computing, is that better?
Right. So this isn't about that. It isn't about speeding up. The faster fintech here refers not to what the market participants do and how fast they come back. That has come down as a number. This is more about if you have an exchange, could you get transactions from one side of the exchange to the other at about the same time or exactly the same time? Okay, and I think this is about removing the jitter intrinsic to packet switch networks, but not doing it by adding an enormous delay to the whole process. One could do that, and that is an example of how one could add a speed bump, as it's called. This is trying to do it without having to do a speed bump.
The question, when I buy stocks, I usually put in a, quote, market order, unquote. Is that good or bad? And by doing so, does the broker make most money in the spread? Anybody want to take a?
Okay, so if you're in a hurry, you can put in a market order and you'll pay a very small fee because somebody has been waiting for you and willing to buy or sell based on your market order for a small profit. But if you're not in a hurry and you know exactly the price that you're willing to pay, you can also put in a limit order. It's pretty easy to do, and I'll bet many people in the audience have done it. So both strategies work depending on whether you're in a hurry or not.
This one I don't quite understand. How do you feel about payment from order flow? Does it ultimately help or hurt retail investors?
Order flow.
Okay, I think I know what that person has in mind. So you might think that you would need to pay the exchange a fee in order to execute your order. But in fact, the exchanges are so anxious to get a large number of orders that they will pay you to put limit orders on their order book because that creates more liquidity and makes your exchange more attractive. And it's a big controversy, but to tell you the truth, no one's been able to show one way or the other whether this is a good idea or not. It's not a lot resting on this one.
Okay. Here's something, I talked about glass, but I didn't talk about wireless. How 5G, the much faster wireless communications, could it create opportunities in fintech? So this new, global technology standard, will it meaningfully change fintech?
Well, it's a way of communicating, and unless you're taking your subway train or your metro, and then you want to feel like you want to trade from there. It's not clear that might change. It does change something, which is the number of connections you can get into, let's say, the internet. You don't have to be tethered or wired, or you don't have to be, because a lot of these things, it's about proximity, not in physical sense, but actually in ether sense. How far are you from some place where you should be transacting? That it could change fairly dramatically. How much of the city could very quickly get to whatever other part of the city that it needs to get to. That'll change. Now, is that finance is the only main beneficiary of this? Yeah, it's one of the beneficiaries. I'm not sure it's...
Do you think that 5G is a threat to Wi-Fi as a technology?
Some perhaps, but I think Wi-Fi will continue to exist in the sort of really small local area sense. 5G can carry a lot more data, but it is intrinsically going to be more of a circuit switch type thing, in the main, because of the gigabits per second of data it can give you. I see it more as a fatter pipe and a really high-speed one with that. And so, but one thing I can say is that the clocks need to be synchronized for to get that kind of benefit of 5G. If a base station's clocks are as well synchronized as being down to a few nanoseconds, then the amount of throughput that you might get from a 5G network could be somewhat proportionately less. And so that's one of the things we've become aware of, that 5G is looking for clocks.
once again, to China, one of the numbers that I saw today was that the rate of deployment of new cell towers in China is order of magnitude faster.
Yes,
no?
yes, I completely agree.
Yeah.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
It's just it's popping up.
So if there is an advantage to 5G, they're going to get there first.
Yeah, I think infrastructure is critical for that.
Yeah. This is for Darrell. What are your views on the tension between distributed, i.e. fragmented markets, and the quality price discovery process, especially given greater number of exchanges in regulated NMS?
Reg NMS.
Reg NMS in the U.S. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, whoever wrote this question is a deep aficionado of financial markets. Let me unpack it a bit. It actually goes back to something that Balaji was raising just a minute ago. Right now, if you send an order into the let's say New York Stock Exchange, if it's gone through your broker, it's actually searched for the best price available on every exchange in the country. And that tends to consolidate the available demands and supplies of stocks in the United States into in a way that gives a more efficient execution. But that's not the case everywhere in the world, and particularly in Europe. There's a lot of concern about fragmentation across different exchanges, because if I send a large order to one exchange, it may get a very bad price relative to what would have been the case had all of the exchanges merged into one, similar to, but not quite like the US NMS system. So I actually just was in Basel, Switzerland a month ago on this exact issue, debating with a number of market participants and regulators about how serious a problem this is, and I think it's a pretty serious problem. And I have a doctoral student and I are actually working on this one right now. How inefficient is it to have market fragmentation? I think it's relatively inefficient, because it means you're breaking up the sources of liquidity that are able to absorb your demands and supplies of trades into bits, and you have to go put them back together again in order to get a good trade execution.
So here's what we talked a little bit about before we got started. How fragile are the fast financial systems to mass hacking by state sponsors or rogue tech groups?
Wow. This is something that the three of us were just discussing before we sat down here tonight. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Okay, so I'll start. So this is a serious problem. Many people put cyber risk to the financial system as the biggest source of financial instability going forward. In other words, before it was the big bank collapsing was the biggest threat, and now it could be a cyber attack on the financial system. And I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. in 2 weeks talking about this problem and what would happen if a major bank had a cyber attack. Would there be a bank run, and if so, how would you handle it? Because large depositors are not just going to sit there and watch their money frozen into their accounts, even if it's not gone. If they can't get it right away, they're going to panic and try to take it out, and that could be very damaging to the economy if everybody tries to move their money out of the banking system all of a sudden. So I think it's a very serious problem.
Do we need better protection than the circuit breakers we have? In that kind of a situation, what would happen if the circuit breakers were tripped?
You don't want to do the circuit breaker. You want to do the opposite. You want to keep everything as open as possible so that the money can flow.
Who makes that decision?
Unfortunately, the decision may be made by the depositors and users of the financial system. If they pull back, then that's bad news.
Well, actually, on the engineering side, many financial companies that do trading derive time through GPS antenna attached to the roofs of the buildings in which they may be co-located with the exchange. This is a fairly common thing to do. And so, in other words, if you have good access to GPS, you not only know your location accurately, but also you can get fairly accurate time. And then you run a wire, figure out how long that wire is precisely, and then you know what the time is here, if the time over there was blah, okay? Now, this is very easy to be jammed. The one big fear is that if I just jam all the GPSs, then this is going to be a huge problem. And so already in anticipation of things like that, people companies have been taking dark fiber from time authorities. For example, the National Physical Lab in the UK supplies dark fiber-based time to a number of the financial institutions directly. Okay, that's an example of how, and in Canada as well, they're doing things like this. That's one way. The other reason that some of the companies are looking to move to the cloud is that cloud has had to look at security. They constantly do it. They probably have very good tools, certainly potentially much better tools than financial institutions have for protecting against attacks. So that's the other reason, identity and access management being the other one, big thing the cloud is good at. So I can see how it is definitely fragile, but at the same time people are aware and the countermeasures being adopted. So security is one of those things that you just the good guys get ahead a little bit, the bad guys get ahead. It's a business to be in forever.
We have a question on the other side of the ecosystem, actually, other end of the ecosystem. By that same token, how confident are you that startup fintech companies can protect client data and assets from hackers and security intrusions? Will they still protect client privacy, or will our privacy evaporate?
This is probably better for
yeah, exactly. So if you host yourself in the cloud, Coinbase has been operating in the cloud for a while now, and startups like Robinhood, etc., probably operate mostly in the cloud. Then you're about as secure as cloud is. It's pretty secure at the moment, but nothing is 100% secure in one sense. But there's also this other side of how much might it evaporate compared to any other alternative, right? It's not about fintech startups. It's about any other way in which a service can be offered. All your credit cards, transportation companies, for example, or elsewhere. They're about as secure or not.
That raises another question, just on an aside. Would workable quantum computation be a huge threat to market security?
It would threat a lot of things, not just market security. At the same time, again, for every one of these technologies that you can come up with something to try and break it, the same thing would give you a way to protect yourself against it. But then the question is, how can you move from an existing thing to this quantum world? And you're talking about regulations and how would it operate over there? I think the human components of this will have to be, upgraded.
Yeah.
Our ways of policy setting and all.
Just to tag on that, on the issue of privacy and data, the events of the last year, particularly the testimony of Mark Zuckerberg in Congress and his decision yesterday to announce that Facebook is now going to prioritize privacy. These are signs that the mass collections of personal data are being perceived as a threat, and that we are making a fairly sharp turn, I think, in the use of technology towards greater prioritization of protecting individual data. And there will be, there's going to be a lot more on this coming in the next few years. I think you'll see either legislation or large tech firms trying to get in front of legislation by demonstrating that they can protect individual data and that they're not going to pass it on as freely as they have been in recent years.
We're coming close to the end, but let me try to combine these two questions. We're back on the China theme as a competitor. The first one is there a chance for Chinese currency to become the reserve currency for encroaching on U.S. Hegemony? And the second half of that is, do you see Alipay or WeChat Pay taking or participating in the U.S. market?
Okay, those are related, but not that closely related. Let me take the first one. Because of China's own concerns about capital leaving the country, the use of their currency, the renminbi, in global markets has actually gone down in recent years, not up. Okay. And it's a very small fraction of usage of the US dollar on global markets as a reserve currency. So it's not even close. Now, having said that, if China keeps growing at its current GDP growth rate, history shows that at some point it'll become a reserve or the reserve currency, but we are far, far from that now. As far as WeChat Pay, it's in the United States now. You can use Alipay to buy a United Airlines ticket now, I see on their website. And WeChat Pay is commonly available around the world. I read yesterday a Norwegian touring company has signed up a deal with one of those two, I forget which, so that when you go to Norway to do tourism, you can use their payment system in Norway. So yeah, it's going global. And if the United States providers of these kinds of services don't get in gear quickly, that will be the de facto mobile payment system around the world.
So Facebook is about competing with WeChat globally. That's what's going on?
Good question. I'm not sure what they intend. Everybody's speculating what Facebook has in mind, but if they go that way, they could do quite a good job in the US.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. I learned a lot. Why don't we give them a hand? Thanks to everybody for your contribution.